The hand that points north. Most customers who wandered into Ambrose Curiosities came for the strange things: clockwork beetles, Victorian mourning jewelry, tarnished daggers with histories no one wanted to hear twice. But no matter what they bought, no matter why they entered, their eyes always drifted to the same object: the hand. It sat on a squat wooden base behind the front counter, pale brown and shrunken, the skin drawn tight as brittle paper. The fingers curled just enough to suggest movement, even though it hadn't belonged to anything living for well over a century. No plaque, no label, no explanation. Only its quiet insistence. It always pointed north. Ambrose never understood how it did that. It wasn't mechanical, didn't hide magnets or gears. Yet every time he moved it, every time a curious customer twisted it to face a different direction, the hand would slowly, patiently swivel back until its index finger aligned with true north. He'd given up trying to rationalize it years ago. Some curios weren't meant to be understood. Tonight, though, he wished he'd never seen it at all. The shop felt colder than it should. The kind of cold that seeped out of old brick and older things. The kind of cold that settled under the skin instead of on it. Ambrose tugged his sweater closer, but didn't leave. He rarely closed early. He didn't like the silence of home any better than the silence here. He dusted a shelf of faded carnival masks, adjusted a glass dome over a 3-winged moth. Anything to keep busy. Anything to avoid looking at the hand. He failed. It sat exactly where he'd left it, index finger straight toward the northern wall. He told himself that should have been comforting, but it wasn't, because at midnight, the hand changed. Ambrose tried not to think about how he discovered that, the customers, and what happened after. He told himself he was mistaken, a coincidence, a terrible, impossible coincidence. Yet the truth was always the same. At midnight, the hand turned toward the nearest person who would die next. He checked the wall clock. 11:42 p.m. Too close. Ambrose breathed in through his nose, slow and steady, as if that might keep the world from shifting again. He wiped down the counter, rearranged a jar of antique keys no one ever purchased. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked toward the mummified hand, expecting, hoping, for any sign of unusual behavior. But it remained perfectly still, obediently pointing north. He almost convinced himself it wouldn't happen tonight. Almost. The second hand crept toward midnight. The fluorescent light above the counter flickered once, then again. Ambrose swallowed hard. Midnight. The hand twitched. Not visibly at first, but he heard it. A soft, papery crackle, like old knuckles stretching after a long sleep. Ambrose stepped back, breath hitching in his throat. Slowly, delicately, the curled index finger lifted a fraction. Then it began to turn. The movement was agonizingly slow, the wooden base gliding almost silently across the polished glass counter. Not north, not toward the door, not toward the street outside, where someone else might be unlucky enough to cross its unseen path. The finger drew a small arc and pointed directly at Ambrose. "No," he whispered. His voice cracked. "No, that's wrong." But the hand didn't move again. It had made its choice. Ambrose stumbled backward into the bookshelf behind him, rattling a row of porcelain dolls. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, drowning out everything else, until a new sound emerged. A faint scrape. Wood on glass. The hand was turning again, this time behind him. He forced himself to turn. The shop was empty. Nothing out of place. Nothing alive. Yet he felt that someone had been there. "This is absurd," he whispered to himself. The hand didn't react. It simply held its pose. He stumbled toward the front door, and his shaking hands jammed his keys into the lock. The lock didn't turn. He tried again, and the lock resisted every effort. Behind him came another sound, a gentle tap against glass. Ambrose turned slowly. The hand had moved and now pointed toward the far wall where he kept the oldest, least sold curiosities. That was when he noticed a cabinet door cracked open. He hadn't left it that way. Compelled, he made his way toward the cabinet, and inside, the artifacts sat exactly where they always sat. Except one. A wooden mask carved with a permanent scream. A tribal funerary piece, hollow-eyed, its teeth bared as if mid-wail. Ambrose never displayed it on the main floor. People complained it watched too closely. Behind him, the hand scraped again, and he turned back to the counter. The mummified hand no longer pointed anywhere. It was flat on its base, palm down, fingers extended. Then, slowly, horribly, it lifted. The clock struck 12:01 a.m. The bulb above him flickered violently, and in its pulse, he saw the outline of a tall, human shape behind the counter. It swayed in the broken light, bending at joints that didn't bend right. A suggestion of shoulders too uneven, a head tilted too far to one side, as if listening. Ambrose stumbled backward, his heel hitting a low trunk. He fell hard onto the wooden floor and saw darkness in his vision for just a few seconds. When his eyes adjusted, he saw the figure leaning over him. He felt pressure in his chest as if he couldn't breathe. Then it stopped. Everything stopped. The figure was no longer there, and a long moment passed before the mummified hand moved again. The wooden base gave a faint scraping sound as the index finger rose, pointing north. Percy was there first. Everyone remembers Percy as annoying. That's the word people always use when his name comes up. Annoying. Not cruel, not dangerous, not even sad, just annoying. Percy talked too much. Percy hovered. Percy didn't understand when to leave people alone. He laughed at the wrong moments and stood too close and asked questions no one wanted to answer. Teachers told him to give others space. Kids rolled their eyes when he showed up. Adults forgot he was there unless he made it impossible not to notice. Percy learned early what it meant to be tolerated. What no one ever agrees on, what no one can quite remember, is when Percy stopped being human. There wasn't a moment, no disappearance, no dramatic incident that made the news or showed up in yearbooks. He didn't die. He didn't move away. He just stopped reacting the way people expected him to. Stopped flinching when they laughed. Stopped asking why. Stopped trying to belong. At the time, everyone thought that was a good thing. I knew Percy in middle school. Everyone did, whether they wanted to or not. He sat 2 desks behind me in science class and breathed a little too loudly when he got excited. He followed conversations without being invited and chimed in late, repeating things other people had already said. Someone started calling him Pea Boy because he once spilled split pea soup down his shirt in the cafeteria, and the name stuck the way cruel names always do. It became background noise. Percy standing at the edge of the group. Percy lingering at lockers. Percy always nearby, never included. Teachers saw it. They always do. But they had classes to teach and rules to follow, and other kids who raised their hands at the right time. Percy wasn't being beaten. He wasn't bleeding. He wasn't failing. So nothing happened. That's the part people forget. Neglect isn't loud. It doesn't demand intervention. It just continues. The first time I noticed something was wrong was after winter break in 7th grade. Percy came back quieter. Not shy. Settled. He still showed up everywhere, but now it felt intentional. Like he was early. Like he'd been waiting. I remember walking into the gym one morning and feeling that strange prickle between my shoulder blades, the sense that someone was standing right behind me. When I turned, Percy was there, staring at the far wall like he hadn't been watching me at all. "Hey," I said, more out of reflex than friendliness. He smiled, not wide, not eager, just calm. "You're here early," he said. "So are you," I replied. "I'm always here first," Percy said, like it was a fact everyone should already know. At the time, I laughed it off. A few weeks later, the bullying escalated. It always does when boredom sets in. A couple of older kids started taking Percy's backpack and tossing it across the courtyard. Someone locked him in the equipment shed during recess and forgot about him until a janitor heard the banging. People laughed. Teachers scolded. No one changed anything. One afternoon, after Percy's backpack hit the pavement for the 3rd time, I felt something shift. Not outside. Inside. A thought slipped fully formed into my mind, uninvited, but strangely comforting. I wish someone would make this stop. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't look at Percy. I didn't even feel particularly angry, just tired yet relieved when the bell rang. That night, I dreamed of standing in the hallway outside the science lab. Percy was beside me. "You don't have to worry about it anymore," he said. When I woke up, the feeling lingered. The next day, one of the kids who'd been messing with Percy didn't show up to school. Then another stopped coming. Someone said their family moved. Someone else said they got transferred after an incident. Details were fuzzy. People stopped asking questions faster than they'd stopped caring. And Percy? Percy was still there. That was the pattern. Anytime things got bad, anytime someone crossed from casual cruelty into something heavier, Percy was nearby. Not intervening, not defending himself, just present. And then, quietly, the problem would resolve itself. Teachers praised improved behavior. Parents breathed easier. The hallways felt calmer. People told themselves things had worked out for the best. No one thanked Percy. Why would they? He hadn't done anything. By high school, when I was 16, Percy offered me something directly. A rumor had started. I hadn't done anything wrong, but that didn't matter. I felt it closing in. Whispers, looks, the way people looked at me. Percy sat beside me on the bus ride home. The seat dipped slightly, like weight settling where it belonged. "You don't deserve that," he said. I didn't respond. I can help, he continued. His voice wasn't eager. It wasn't emotional. It was steady. I swallowed. How? You don't have to do anything, he said. Just let it go. And that was the moment. The offering wasn't words. It was relief. The idea that I could stop carrying it. That the responsibility could belong to someone or something else. I didn't say yes, and I didn't say no. My silence was enough. By the end of the week, the rumor evaporated. The person who started it deleted their accounts, transferred schools, vanished from conversations entirely. People stopped bringing it up like it had never existed. And Percy? Percy was there first the next morning, standing by the lockers. After graduating, I left Monroe Bay for college. I built a life that felt quieter and safer. But every now and then, in crowded rooms or tense workplaces, I'd feel it again, that pressure, that sense of someone already standing beside the problem. Sometimes, when I overheard cruelty and did nothing, I felt relief before guilt could set in. That's when I knew Percy was still working, because he isn't just some bullied boy from my childhood. He is what forms when neglect is allowed to accumulate long enough to notice itself. He's the feeling that someone else will handle it, the comfort of inaction, the quiet transfer of responsibility. Percy doesn't punish, he reassigns. I ran into someone from middle school a few years ago. We talked about old teachers, old jokes, old names. Eventually, Percy came up. God, they laughed. Remember how annoying he was? I nodded. Whatever happened to him? I thought about all the moments people wished things would stop, about how often they did, about how no one ever remembered Percy being gone, only that things felt easier after. He was there first, I said. They frowned. What does that mean? But I didn't answer, because Percy is still there, and he's very good at waiting. The wraith who fell in love with a light bulb. Cobb and Curio had always smelled faintly of lavender, dust, and the kind of wiring that should probably have burned the place down decades ago. Rose Cobb insisted the shop's odd scent was character, though most locals agreed it was a fire hazard with a good attitude. Rose herself was as much an antique as the shop, 83, sharp-eyed, soft-spoken, and famous in Monroe Bay for her belief that everything in her store had a personality. She just didn't know that one of them was right. It started on a wet Tuesday evening after closing. Rose turned off the neon sign, locked the front door, and begun her nightly ritual of telling the mannequins good night, purely for her own amusement, of course. She didn't notice the faint chill seeping in through the cracked ceiling vent. She didn't see it above the old cash register. She didn't see Thimble. Thimble had been drifting around Monroe Bay for the better part of 60 years, too shy to properly haunt, too nervous to commit to a full possession, too sentimental to let go of their earthly attachments. Wraiths weren't usually tender-hearted creatures, but Thimble had always been soft. He floated into Cobb and Curio with no intention of staying. He just wanted a quiet shelf to sulk on, maybe a dusty painting to whisper poetry at. And then he saw it. The Edison bulb. It hung crookedly from an old metal fixture above the register, glowing warm gold in the dimness. Its filament curled into a graceful spiral, pulsing softly with a living heartbeat of light. Thimble froze midair. He had seen humans fall in love, messy, clumsy, embarrassingly fragile, but he never understood it. Love was supposed to be irrational, inconvenient, overwhelming. Wraiths didn't do that. Wraiths were supposed to drift and hunger and mourn. But the moment Thimble saw the Edison bulb's golden hum, his soul, or whatever passed for a soul, fluttered like a moth trapped in a jar. "Oh," he whispered, voice a trembling exhale of static. "You radiant enchantment, you incandescent miracle." The bulb brightened faintly, purely because Rose jiggled the wiring earlier and accidentally improved its contact. Thimble, of course, took this as a sign. He swooned, collapsing into the rafters like a lovesick Victorian widow. He hovered there, hands clasped, utterly undone. He was in love. Hopelessly, catastrophically, wraithfully in love. Over the next few days, Rose noticed unusual things happening in the shop. For one, her register drawer kept opening on its own. Customers complained that the Edison bulb flickered aggressively whenever they stood beneath it. One tourist claimed it flickered in Morse code, but Rose told him he'd been standing too close to the refurbished Ouija board, which tended to make people dramatic. Meanwhile, Thimble was busy being the worst and most enthusiastic romantic suitor imaginable. He collected trinkets, buttons, coins, a small brass key, and laid them in a neat pile beneath the Edison bulb. Rose assumed she had mice again. Thimble rearranged the electrical flow so the bulb would glow a little brighter whenever he approached. Rose assumed her wiring was improving with age. He whispered static-laced poetry into the glass. "My filament-flamed beloved, you glow for me and me alone. Please never dim. I could not bear it." Whenever a customer lingered too long beneath the bulb, Thimble hissed at them from the ceiling vent. Rose started offering discounts to anyone who complained about aggressive ambiance. On Friday morning, the power bill arrived, and Rose nearly fainted as she stared at the outrageous number. She eyed the flickering Edison bulb. It had always run a bit hot, but lately it had grown warm enough to toast bread under. "Enough nonsense," she declared. "You're getting replaced." Thimble, curled invisibly around the rafters, felt a jolt of dread. He didn't fully understand Rose's intentions, but he heard the words. Replaced. Removed. Rose climbed a ladder and unscrewed the bulb with one gloved hand, replacing it with a brand new LED. After she left, Thimble drifted toward it, hovering only inches away. "Hello? Can you hear my longing, my devotion, my—" The LED flickered in sheer disinterest, and then it hummed at the wrong frequency. Thimble recoiled violently, and his grief ignited into misery. Then his misery turned into rage. The following day, the cash register rang on its own for Rose, printing out a receipt that read, "How could you?" The LED bulb buzzed loudly, then exploded in a shower of harmless sparks. "Bring it back," Rose shrieked and grabbed a broom. "Bring it back!" A car alarm wailed outside. The wiring in the walls groaned. All right," she yelled into the air. "I'll put the damn light back in." She grumbled, adjusted her glasses, and found the bulb. She screwed it back in. For the rest of the night, the Edison bulb glowed beautifully. Too beautifully. Rose went to bed blissfully unaware that Thimble whispered his devotion, that the old wiring began to pulse rapidly. At 2:13 a.m., the streetlights on 4th Avenue all popped simultaneously. A transformer blew. Power died across 3 blocks, except for one place. Cobb and Curio still shone with a single golden light. If you walked past the window that night, and many insomniac locals did, you would see a small, warm glow illuminating shelves of antiques. If you're lucky, you'll see something else, hovering close to it and smiling with giddy devotion. But if you're really lucky, you'll also hear its devotion. The Glass Child. The first thing I noticed wasn't that my daughter wouldn't speak. It was that she didn't reach. When they brought her home from the hospital, everyone was so relieved. The doctors, my husband, my mother. They stood in the doorway as the orderly helped her into the house, praising her bravery, her strength, her recovery. Someone said, "She looks good," and everyone nodded like that settled it. She walked on her own. She breathed normally. Her eyes tracked movement. She even smiled when prompted. But when I knelt in front of her and opened my arms, she didn't step forward. She stood very still, head slightly tilted, watching me like I was something on a screen. "Sweetheart?" I said softly. She waited half a second, just long enough to be wrong, then lifted her arms and placed them around my neck. Her touch was light, careful, like she'd learned where to put her hands by watching someone else do it first. Everyone else missed that. They always do. The illness had been sudden, a fever that wouldn't break, a night that ended in sirens and hospital lights and doctors who spoke in careful tones. For 3 days, I sat beside her bed, listening to machines breathe for her. On the 4th day, she opened her eyes and smiled. On the 5th, they said she was fine. She might be a little quiet, the doctor told us. That's normal after trauma. Normal. Such a generous word. You can fit almost anything inside it if you try hard enough. At home, she moved like she remembered how. She ate when food was placed in front of her. She followed instructions. She nodded when asked questions. She smiled when someone smiled at her. But she didn't initiate. No questions, no complaints, no wandering curiosity, no sudden laughter at nothing. She didn't hum while she colored or sung to herself in the bath. When she played with her toys, she arranged them carefully and left them that way. If I didn't speak first, the room stayed silent. "She's just tired," my husband said when I brought it up. "She's processing," my mother insisted. "Give her time." The pediatrician ran tests. Everything came back clean. Vitals perfect, reflexes normal, cognitive responses appropriate. "She's a good listener," the doctor said with a smile. That word again. Good. At night, I began to notice the sound. It wasn't loud, just a faint tick when she shifted in bed, like glass touching glass. I told myself it was the house settling, the radiator, anything but the truth creeping up my spine. One evening, while brushing her hair, my fingers slipped. Instead of the warm resistance of skin, I felt something smooth beneath the strands. Cool. Too cool. I froze. My daughter didn't flinch. "Does that hurt?" I asked. She waited, then shook her head. I pressed a fingertip gently against the skin at the nape of her neck. There was a faint sound, a tiny, crystalline ping. I pulled my hand back as if burned. "What was that?" I whispered. She tilted her head and mirrored my expression. Concern, confusion. A perfect copy, performed just a breath too late. That night, I dreamed of holding her as a baby, only she was heavy, rigid, and transparent in my arms. Light passed through her chest, bending strangely as if something inside was wrong. I woke with my heart pounding and found her standing in the doorway of my bedroom. She hadn't made a sound. "I couldn't sleep," she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, yet flat, every syllable placed carefully, like reading from a script. I sat up and reached for her without thinking, but she stepped back. "I'm okay," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to worry you." She was already learning what she was supposed to say. The cracks appeared a week later. At first, I thought it was my imagination. A faint line at her wrist, another along her collarbone, hairline fractures beneath the skin, visible only when the light hit just right. I asked my husband to look. He squinted. "I don't see anything." I showed my mother. "She's pale," she said. "That's all." When I took her back to the doctor, he frowned at the marks, but shrugged it off. "Skin can do strange things after illness. Dehydration, stress." "She makes a sound when I touch her," I said. He smiled gently. "You're exhausted." That was the moment I realized something terrible. Everyone needed her to be fine more than they needed her to be real. The sound grew louder over time. Not always, only when she moved too quickly, or when she was surprised, or when I touched her without warning. A soft chime, a brittle scrape. One night, I woke to find her sitting on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by handheld toy mirrors. She sat perfectly still in the center, head turning slowly as she watched herself from every angle. "What are you doing?" I asked. She looked up and smiled. "Practicing." "Practicing what?" "Being good." I crossed the room and knelt in front of her. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts. "Can you tell me how you feel?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. A thin crack split the corner of her lips. Clear fluid beaded there, not blood, but something translucent that caught the light. I pulled her into my arms, but she didn't hug me back. Instead, she trembled, and the sound that came from her was unmistakable. Glass under strain. I screamed. They took her away the next morning. Specialists, therapists, observers behind glass walls. They told me she was dissociating, that I was projecting, that stress and grief can distort perception. "She's stable," they said. "She's compliant. She's responding appropriately." Through the observation window, I watched her sit quietly, hands folded in her lap, reflecting the calm concern of every adult who spoke to her. She looked perfect. When I pressed my palm against the glass, she did the same from the other side. For a moment, our hands aligned. Then the cracks spread. A spiderweb of fractures raced across her face, her arms, her chest. The sound was deafening now, shattering layered over silence. The staff rushed in, alarms sounded. Someone pulled me away. Through it all, my daughter never screamed. She simply looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since she'd come home. And in her eyes, I saw fear. The glass collapsed inward, and when it was over, there was nothing left to hold. They never found a body. They told me she'd suffered a catastrophic episode, that sometimes trauma presents in incomprehensible ways, that I should seek counseling. No one used the word replacement. Sometimes when I pass her bedroom, I swear I see movement in the glass of the window, a shape practicing expressions, waiting to be seen. She came because everyone needed her to exist, and because no one wanted to wait for my daughter to come back.